Hello, Cardstack community. My name is Chris C., the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of the Web3. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Masa Finance founder Brandon Playford, who's going to talk about the true unicorn of DeFi, uncollateralized lending, and all the things that helps us build there, where that's credit and decentralized data and the ability for us to understand who we should trust to give money to in the world of lending. And welcome, Brandon, and glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, great to be here, Chris. Thanks so much for having me today.
So I think you're working on some of the most elusive part of these DeFi. I think we have some really good DeFi summers. 1.0, 2.0 wasn't as good. Under collateralized lending could be a bit of a problem, but I think when you have a history in both fintech and DeFi and blockchain. I'd love to kind of get a little bit of your sense of like what brought you to working on this really important part of thinking about credit in the world of decentralization.
Yeah, a lot of it starts from like my personal story. I grew up in a really disadvantaged part of the UK without much access to capital, low income, really credit was out of reach. I went to university later in life at 24, not 19, and that was funded by myself because even with the grant system in the UK, it was really hard to like pay for university. It was very expensive. And throughout my career after that, I always was building businesses or in situations where my opportunity was held back from firstly an income perspective and then being able to leverage anything to get access to credit. And what we often take for granted is that credit unlocks wealth because it builds leverage beyond what we already have. So in order to like build a business, own a house, get a car, get to work with that car, you've got to be able to access some kind of credit facility in order to move up. And it is the heart blood of like an upwardly mobile society. So being in the crypto space since 2013, I was an early Doge and Litecoin miner. That gave me my financial freedom, as it were. Just 4 GPUs and a mining rig, and solo mining gave me 15 years of income through like an internet connection.
Did you frame your GPU in a box on the wall?
I do still have it.
You should put it on the wall, right?
Well. Yeah. I sometimes think, should I post my wallet on Twitter at some point? I think I will do.
Yes.
And yeah, my pseudonym was Super Sheeb, and you'll see that kind of echoed in other parts of the internet, some places. And really kind of, looking at what holds people back is the ability to unlock data for someone else to be able to measure risk. And obviously the prevailing system is credit bureaus that do that. But there's some really interesting like other technology using machine learning where in emerging markets, there's 3.5 billion people globally that struggle to access credit and it holds them back. What would the world look like if we had open, decentralized Web3 infrastructure where you could create an identity, you could build history, and you could build reputation and use that to unlock credit as one use case. There's many other use cases from that core sort of identity around financial trust. And we're focused on, building that layer and unlocking different use cases with credit being the first entry point.
Yeah, you mentioned that the emerging market outside of the U.S., which obviously has the trifactors of questionable companies that are being contracted to do the credit reporting business, and obviously there's the one true FICO score that we all bow down to. How do you see, has that infrastructure that the U.S. dare I say pioneer, but certainly is what is being referenced. How's that different in new implementation in the non-blockchain, pre-blockchain world outside of the US?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like FICO as a standard is still today considered the gold standard. Even if you're someone like myself that's an immigrant to the US, you start off with a 0 FICO score. So getting here at 33, I've had to go through the steps over the last 7 years to establish credit. And even now with the crypto assets I have, I can't use my FICO score with my crypto assets in the US to get a mortgage, for example. So once again, held back from getting a mortgage. If you look at FICO, if you've got a good established FICO score, if you've been added to a credit card as like a teenager or an 18-year-old to your parents' credit card, you inherit that score. So you inherit the score from your parents, like get your foot off the mark. And there's a bit of like selection bias already in the system just through that. Like already that's making it a little elite if you want to look at it that way. Right. So the standard for lenders, FICO is amazing for lenders. They get unlocking of data, there's this like chronological history almost through you and your family that transcends like generations in terms of how it can give you a leg up to credit. And if you're building that from scratch, it takes a long time. It's really
Right.
challenging, and lenders won't assess you without FICO. They do assess you. You're at like crazy high rates at 36%, which is the legal maximum that you can pay in the US. If you look
Right.
outside of the US to somewhere like Africa or Latam, without real high credit bureau penetration, you're using different data sources. That could be bank transactional data sources. It could be invoices if you're a business. It could be mobile money or mobile device data if it's Android, through which you can infer through machine
Right.
learning someone's creditworthiness, and you can get the same predictive capabilities as, for example, FICO in those markets.
FICO.
And
Yeah.
and I have another business that I run with my co-CEO where we do this with banks, credit unions, credit bureaus, and financial institutions. And we're looking at ways in which we can bring that to Web3, both the FICO in traditional markets, along with more novel models that other people are building in emerging markets. The difference between emerging markets and the US is the bureaus don't have high penetration. There's this big cold start problem with lending. In order to build a new model, you have to have a data set to train your model on, whether that's a scorecard or a advanced like machine learning model. If you don't have the data from your like outcomes, your goods and your bads to train that model, you can't build a new model. So there's a
Right.
real problem with cold starting here, and part of what we're building at Masa is enabling that cold start in Web3 by sort of bringing this hybrid bridge from the old world to the new world and being pragmatic about that sort of scaling.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about Web 2 and Web 3 as a
Mm-hmm.
bridge, right? And it's that
Yeah.
there needs to be a thing that connect on both sides. And for most people in crypto, fiat on ramp and fiat on ramp is like one element of that bridge, taking the fintech
Yep.
revolution of moving USD, not USDC, and then turning that into the moving of actual token, ERC20, could be USDC or ETH, right? And that is very valuable. And a lot of the biggest winners thus far has been those bridges. Do you see
Yep.
that in your experience doing this kind of data analysis in the fintech arena? Do you believe that there is enough ability for us to bring that data sets onto blockchain, right? Because you're thinking about blockchain as a data store, it's actually
Mm-hmm.
pretty small, right? Like it fits in a thumb
Yep.
drive, right? If you think
Yeah.
about data set necessary to train machine learning models, that is much bigger. How do you reconcile the data size order of magnitude in blockchain with
Yeah.
the type of data necessary to have really good credit scoring?
Yeah. It's a great question. So the way that we look at it is this is a journey. We see the journey to the future state, which is my vision for the future state, and I think a lot of like crypto native Web3 individuals is a fully decentralized society, a decentralized world. Vitalik writes a lot about this, and other people in the
Hmm.
space. Sort of what would it take to build this new society where there was complete disintermediation and decentralized infrastructure, including data. The storage of data on chain, I think, is going to be our longest tail exercise to get there. And there's Arweave, IPFS,
Hmm.
Filecoin,
Yep.
Storage, all of these other platforms solving for that. Where we come in is looking at how we can start using data that's maybe bigger in size on
Hmm.
chain in a way where it's verifiable. So you gave on and off ramps as a good example with exchanges. We've also got Chainlink that's been sort of an on and
Right.
off ramp for like pricing feeds, for example.
Hmm.
So the question we started asking myself like 18 months ago before we started building Masa was, what would that layer look like to have the same ability to feed data in on chain, where you could train your model off chain in a local environment or in a cluster, but
Yep.
ultimately the output of that model, the output of the data sources could be reflected on chain. And
Right.
that looks like for us, a soul bound identity where
Hmm.
you can connect on and off chain data sources to your soul and verify and attest they are true. And
Yep.
then a private transaction layer through which you can share them with a smart contract in a
Hmm.
single party or multi party way, using your own discernment as the owner of the data. While the data may be housed off chain, so housed on chain, it's the access you're granting being decentralized, and then the actual consumption of it being decentralized by a lender using it or a DeFi protocol authenticating against this identity that you build up. So I see it as like progressive decentralization,
Right.
with the user experience and the user authentication and ownership being decentralized first, and then incrementally decentralizing the data as, you know, the space improves and scalability improves and decentralized storage really kind of reaches critical mass.
Yeah, I think you mentioned soulbound token, which is a new term that has been going around because of what Vitalik was saying about this idea of being able to have these non-transferable token that is a on-chain version of a credential or a
Yeah.
proof that can be kind of assigned to you as a type of permanent, I don't know, tattoo.
Like records or credit.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. It could be many things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't use the word cow branding as a way, but it is a type of indelible mark of some sort.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or
what's
permanent
interesting,
badge.
a permanent badge, and
Yeah.
you did mention this idea of using that as a stub or as a way of pointing to additional information, whether
Yep.
that's in these decentralized storage you mentioned, Arweave,
Exactly.
Filecoin, Skynet, stuff like that. But you also mentioned a private blockchain layer for that private transaction, which obviously that was kind
Yeah.
of invented in the enterprise blockchain area as a public transaction between company private
Yeah.
transaction. None of your business to know who Nike bought the thing from, only the fact that they bought
Yeah.
something, right? Can you explain to me the privacy kind of approach? Because that's really important, right? You're not dealing with
Yeah.
just trades we're doing, kind of to make money. We're talking about who we are, who we deal with, whether we have been honest, and how do we protect that information in your combination of tools that you have assembled?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So if you read Vitalik's paper, Finding Web3's Soul, I'd thoroughly recommend it to everyone that's really interested in Web3. It paints this picture of, like you said, your wallet or your account that you use predominantly being your soul, and then adding in different dimensions to it that typically in his paper are thinking about on-chain links. So links to on-chain data, on-chain
Mm-hmm.
credentials, for example, that are generally public. Now, we've been working with a authentication layer that we've been building. This is all our own like bottom-up building that we've done, where we wanted to essentially link using almost like a soulbound NFT, like you said, like
Mm-hmm.
it's a pointer to a data store.
Right.
Now, if we think about the user journey kind of onboarding to Web3, your first step is creating a username. Like in any app or ecosystem, you create a username. Now, the username is totally fine being public. It can be pseudonymous. Most of the time it is. We have that in
Yes.
Telegram, we have it in Discord. So with our platform, step one is you create a soulbound username. We call it a soul name.
Mm-hmm.
That is pointed to an on-chain public link. Think of this like
Mm-hmm.
a soulbound NFT.
Mm-hmm.
And the link is your link to the image. And in fact, that's data about your soul name that you've defined, and you're claiming that. You're claiming your soul. The next step is building like layers of data that unlock more use cases and more value for your online representation. So let's take credit. I want to connect my Equifax or Experian credit report to my soul. Okay,
Right.
I authenticate through our platform through a centralized API. We pull the report and store that off chain in an encrypted format. We then have a link that's got a hash that points to the data off chain. It also
Mm-hmm.
points to my soul. I can sign to unlock the hash data that's held off chain to a third party.
I
When
see.
that happens, that package, that object of data, the credit report in this case, it is passed through, and we do use we actually use a fork of an enterprise private transaction layer that Consensus and Hyperledger built. We've forked
Mm-hmm.
it. It's called
Yep.
Tessera. It's built in Java, and
Yep.
we use that for that particular private transaction layer because they built it in production for a long time to satisfy the use case you described, and it's
Mm-hmm.
really nice and fit for purpose for this sharing of that final unlocked link data to a
Mm-hmm.
third party. And we give optionality, so you can store it privately and share it privately, or you can store it on chain and have it visible to everyone.
Yeah.
So that's our approach, and we see that as like a really important bit of infrastructure where anyone can come and launch SPTs that have these data pointers and
Yeah.
use our layer to authenticate on the user's behalf to give access to it.
Yeah, and I think
It's a
this
really novel
idea.
approach.
No, I think it's really cool because that approach was pioneered in the enterprise blockchain because there is less trust between
Yeah.
competitors. Even if they're working together in a supply chain for sneakers, they are still competing on many
Yep.
launches and drops that are material if there's too much information for Adidas to know what Nike is doing, right? So the private transaction that came from that is, I think, is really cool that you're using it in a public way.
Yeah.
By the way, just as a sidebar, everybody say, well, you can't put medical record on train. Well, what you just described is one way to put medical record on train.
Yeah.
So and actually I had a discussion with some executive at Mount Sinai, which is a big hospital chain in New York, specific about that using enterprise blockchain. But it's great to see that being launched in a
Yeah.
public network basis. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it surprises me no one's done it this way before. I'm not entirely sure, and like even wrapping all this up, we're in the process of writing our own internal like EIP proposal, and expecting to put that out into the Ethereum community over the next few months, probably the next quarter. We'll actually submit our SBT standard to this as an EIP, with all of the ability for people to start building on this kind of principle of like hash pointing to data, and then using our authentication layer to share with whomever you want through this private transaction layer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned a value chain of trust, right? So you begin with something like the raw data, and then from the raw data you infer maybe who that person is, some sort
Yep.
of like, and then there's a score, and then there's a badge, right? And then there's a data
Yep.
access that comes with that. I think we may have skipped over this idea of KYC. And KYC not just in terms of your soul name, but in terms of like there are certain types of off-chain data source that tells you your birthday, the actual thing, and your address information. How important it is for uncollateralized lending to know this specific human person?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I'm going to take a moment just to like link this back to risk.
Yeah.
So what we've seen in DeFi since MakerDAO really kind of launched their, collateralization or over collateralization for stablecoins is the lowest risk entry point with lending is obviously collateralized lending or over collateralized lending.
Over collateralized.
Now, because you're holding someone's assets, you don't have to manage risk by identifying who they are to go and collect from them, unless, of course, you're in a situation where there's such small liquidity that you have slippage in a liquidation, and then you have losses on that chain as a result of that position slipping.
Yeah.
We saw this in Solend. That was the big concern about the whale that had a large like over collateralized position,
Right.
that there would be bad debt on chain from that liquidation. And the way that we're viewing this philosophically is that you as the individual should have the choice as to what you start revealing about yourself to get value. So let me walk through this. Like if you're a crypto Web3 pseudonymous desiring user, you have the opportunity to link minimal information and only reveal your crypto assets. By revealing them, I'm staking them and putting them in escrow. Now, if I want to start decollateralizing that, like going to like partially collateralized or under collateralized, I need to give more information because the counterparty risk, the risk to the person that's like taking on the debt is increasing. I should be able to reveal that information only to the other person. It shouldn't be revealed to everybody out there, just that one other person. So for us, we see this as like an onion, where you're building up layers of verified credentials that you as the individual can determine who you share them with selectively to unlock value at different stages. And I would say that, to get a house with the house collateralizing the mortgage, I would have a very high propensity to give a lot of information to the person lending, because the value of me buying a house and then, paying into equity there is very, very high as opposed to like continuing to rent. So that's our approach. Our approach is like giving flexibility to the end user and a toolkit to like lenders in this case, where they can say, I would actually like this next stage of credential, and KYC might be one of those. So like,
yes,
we could use
it's like a boost, right? Like you're using your real world legal internet as a boost, right? To get better rates.
That's a great way of putting it. I
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, I'm probably going to steal that from you.
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
Anytime. I
I
think
love
of
that.
everything as like an RPG game, so like it's everything is has an analogy, right?
That's fantastic. Yeah, I really like it. Yeah, and like we're integrating with Discord, for example, so you can
Hmm.
link your Discord credentials to your Sol. We're linking to Telegram, so you can link your Telegram credentials. Now, there's some really interesting things that come from that. We're automatically seeing have you verified your email within your identity. You can
Right.
then share the third party attestation that Discord and Telegram have done to verify your phone number and your email. Like
Right.
we don't have to use a third party to do it. So it's kind of using and recycling some infrastructure out there and ultimately giving you the ability to share it and
Yeah.
boost yourself when you need like a different level of value when risk increases inevitably with these products.
Yeah, it's interesting that you have all these data sources and these boosts, and these are all kind of still in the raw data. The KYC is a type of raw
Yeah,
data, right? Like it's like, and that raw
yeah, it
data can
is.
have some like kind of like derived information, such as a transitive type of verification of email by way of the Telegram account linkage. Um, FICO is one true score. So for everybody
Mhm.
agrees with it, there's a cutoff at like 700, 800. Do you imagine a world where there's many, many, many scores that can be built on top of this thing? Or do you believe that for simplicity for the lender, there should be one true score?
Yeah, it's a great question. Often people ask the team at Massa and the people that are building it, are we building a credit score? And I'm very quick to say no, we're building a credit infrastructure that looks more like a bureau. So what is a bureau? A
Hmm.
bureau is your first name, last name, your address. It's verified. It tracks where you've lived over a period of time. It even tracks your employer, your credit lines, and any bad history you've had. So
Hmm.
if we want to think about how that translates to like a Web3 context, um, and what scores could look like in the future, if you actually go onto the Experian app, download it, you'll have your like FICO Vantage score as your like blanket score. Now,
Hmm.
within that is a subset of scores, one for car loans, one for housing,
Hmm.
one for personal
Hmm.
loans. So the lender actually uses your FICO score as like pre-qualification and filtering, and then tends to use a different score, like a custom score for a product, to score you. So I believe in a world, and we'll see a world of multiple scores, all tailor-made and fitted for specific use cases. Like maybe one is to like understand the risk of liquidation in an
Yeah.
RV position. Cred protocol is doing something like this. We're going to pull in their score, allow someone to connect that to their soulbound identity, and that maybe helps them to go to RV and share that information and get a decollateralized or under
Right.
collateralized loan because they have a low probability of getting liquidated.
Yeah.
So I do see this as a universe of like scores and risk metrics, and we're the base layer that's allowing for the data to be surfaced and shared, and even in
Hmm.
some cases used to train models. So we have
Hmm.
like a data farming program on the protocol right now, where once you've created your soul and you've soul linked some data, you can opt into allowing us to do machine learning on your data. We won't share it anywhere else, but we'll reward you for letting us do machine learning on your data. We see that groups of people will be able to get together and even maybe DAOs forming around data where you can pull together data and some of these new unique models be surfaced through that collaboration and value return to the user who is having their data used to train a model is like the ultimate end goal.
Yeah, you mentioned machine learning. It's like very
Mm-hmm.
little machine going on in in loans, right? Like you would think that
Yeah.
there's more. In maybe in gating transactions and purchase pattern, there's a lot of that stuff going on. It works pretty well. It's pretty real time. But when it comes to loans and lending, you can count on a finger, one hand, how many digit percentage has any machine learning in it on a global loan portfolio.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy, right? Like
Yeah.
at whatever transaction rate, so little machine learning in loans. And my feeling on this is that the blockchain making data more available, whether that's mostly largely public or will especially with the correlation between Filecoin data sets and on-chain kind of like addresses or souls, it's going to unlock a really a bonanza in being able to
Yeah.
train, right? Because right now the only
Yep.
data set we have is like biased, scraped, centralized data set that Google and OpenAI has. But if it becomes a really organic and noisy, but still organic and public data set that is sourced from the that is origin from the blockchain and then pointing somewhere else, and then hopefully you can get to it, I think it's actually going to create a lot more interesting jobs for data scientists.
Yeah.
I'm actually
Yeah.
thinking the data transparency aspects of what they do is actually enabling this exponential growth in the algorithm of
Yeah.
AI, which is staffed by the shittiness of the centralized data set.
Exactly.
There is a collision event
Exactly.
that I am looking forward to.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people have been trying to do this. Like, how do you seed an open source data set? Like, what is the lowest entry point to getting the flywheel turning? There's a pretty
Hmm.
big cold start problem. If you're not getting value, like, how do you get people to share their data?
Yeah.
We're finding that building credit is exponentially increasing our user base. We've gone from 0 to 42,000 users with organic growth only,
Yeah.
expecting to see that go to, like, you know, the 100, 200,000 users over the next couple of months. And it's because there is a really high demand and need for people to, you know, get more from a credit system than what they currently have. Even those that are pretty well served, it's faster. Like, capital efficiency in DeFi is going to massively increase
Yeah.
with the unlocking of uncollateralized lending. And you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Like, this aligns really well with the strategy we've got with the credit bureau that we're looking to work with. Is they would like to understand over the long term what the data held on chain can do off chain, and
Hmm.
how can we bring these two worlds together to get a better picture of, like, credit worthiness for some people that are traditionally thin file, but on chain, thicker file.
Yeah. And a lot of people are talking about the ability to source the data, and so many of these kind of first instinct thing is that you should get paid for your data. And then you do your math and you kind of divide it up and say, okay, my data is worth to the end buyer of this data 0.0018 cents.
Yeah.
Right, like, right, because you're one row of data and that whatever. But in credit, it's different, right? Your data, you say the boost, right? Your data got your
Yeah.
rate down 1%. Let's just say
Exactly.
that is a substantial amount of money over a 30-year loan or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
right? So
Or
maybe
it's unlocked funding where you couldn't get it before, and in which case
right.
it's you can send your kids to school, or you can get a car to get to work. It's, like, really profound, the unlocking that happens when people share data for credit.
Yeah, so it may be that we are actually not understanding how much value we need to give
Yeah.
to build this open source data set or open data set.
Right.
And I think it's a lot more than just like get paid
Yeah.
for your data or like get paid to browse the
It
ads. So
is.
you have different. So I think this is actually quite kind of profound in the fact that we may have misjudged the people's own understanding of their worth to their data. Their data is worth the mortgage or worth going to school and getting a loan,
Exactly.
not worth
Exactly.
1 cent, right?
One
Or
hundred
five
percent agree with
dollars,
you.
right? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're onto something there in terms of not quite inverting, but like overwhelmingly increase the multiples of value given to the individuals for that individual's data.
Yeah.
It's
I love
brilliant.
it. I love that you're right there. That's exactly right. And we're seeing it reflected from our users. You know, the user feedback we get, the traction we're getting, it's overwhelmingly clear that that is the case from our actual end user.
Hmm. And I think you mentioned about the on-chain data, right? A lot of the on-chain interactions right now are trading, and,
Yep.
and 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 trading with leverage.
Yep.
I think I described most things. People kind of say, no, it's a lot more. It's like, no, it's not, right? Like if you use those two things and you use it as like a set, as most of the Venn diagrams in covered. Um, we believe at Cardstack, and this is, when we were working on like, what we really believe in, we believe in two things. One is decentralization and composability should change the whole stack all the way to the UI, and that's a lot
Yep.
about our JavaScript research. The second one is when things are composed together, you need to be able to attribute who gets paid for the value they brought. So it's a lot of
Yep.
it's about payment splits, and it's about revenue splits. So I think one of the things that we're working on is kind of the revenue protocol for Web3. Like, what does payment
Yep.
processing look like, and what are
Yep.
missing? And people say, no, you can pay people using Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, God forbid, or even ERC20. And say, well, what about refunds? What about escrow? What about
Yeah.
automated things? What about being able to do invoice factoring? Like these. What
Right.
about like paying in different things? What about exchange rates? What about agreeing exchange rate? How about preset exchange rate? What about discount paying in certain time? Like these are real logic that I think people assume exist, not maybe all
Yeah.
automated, but automated enough in the supply chain in the world of like payments and treasury management and stuff like that. But none of it is built because the people in blockchain thinks that a transfer function is enough, and it is not. It's just a substrate of something else. That's a lot of what
Yeah.
we're building at Cardstack for all different chains and leveraging multi-sig wallet like no-sig saving system to provide like corporate account and like controls and kind of fiduciary responsibility for organizations and stuff. But what that's to say is that, with payments added back in, then you have something really interesting on chain history. Like you can
Yeah.
actually do commercial transaction on chain and building up instead of just paying your bills, your mortgage with a check and getting that to a bureau. Suddenly that information is on chain first and in the bureau
Exactly.
second. So I
Yeah.
think the shift of commercial activity, which hopefully will come with the next wave of DeFi, would actually unlock some of the underlying answers of, substantial amount of commerce is happening through the settlement of, let's say, USDC on chain.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think it's really interesting what you say is like we all take for granted that every bit of software we use to run a business has got business logic baked into an API somewhere. None
Mm-hmm.
of that is modular and or reusable. It's
Yes.
specific to the business. So if you and I are building a company and we've got a like billing interface with a customer, there are services that we can plug into as an API, like software as a service to like unlock billing without building it. But most engineers build that internally. And it's all proprietary
Yes.
code that you're building the business logic in your back end uniquely. That's totally different what you're saying. What you're saying is like you can create modular, composable business logic that is open source in a conform standard,
Mm-hmm.
increases efficiency and like delivery time. It unifies the data set in terms of how it's all looking across the stack and the ecosystem itself, which is really really powerful and similar to the way we're thinking about data unification specifically for credit and identity here. A lot of people think of bureaus as just being a credit like decisioning engine. They're all
Mm-hmm.
built on identity first. Like the first step on all this is like verifying your end user and like giving them
Yeah.
some kind of identity and route to like link everything to. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, and when we talk about the standardization of being able to have something that is compatible, but has
Mm-hmm.
unique implementation as needed for different business logic, you're actually describing ERC 721 in NFTs, right? You've got the
Yep.
standard, right, which everybody and every marketplace reads, and then there's those very very unique aspects of different implementation that does different things. Same with tokens, but obviously ERC 721 is slightly more mature, right? We
Yeah.
see that type of composability, which is mostly a back end concept. The front end is still kind of a wild west. Everybody built a NFT minting platform for the first time over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's fine. But I do believe this idea of being able to say, hey, I'm trying to do this thing, which is like, let's say a soulbound credential token. You can start with a full stack application and then
Exactly.
basically fork it or without breaking its interfaces and add features and still be compatible. And that's what we are
Exactly.
doing in the JavaScript layer, which then can
Yeah.
map very nicely with adapted and reuse in the NFT or the Solidity layer as well. So it's a hard problem. We mentioned in the pre-shows that like some of these technology that we need to build to make the Web3 and the decentralized world happen takes multiple years. And we're working on that
Yeah.
problem. It's modularization of front end that crosses organization boundary between the SaaS company, also the users of the businesses. It's not a simple problem. We're still dealing with 17 different sign-on against 14 different passwords. So let's not say that that has a solved problem. But increasingly, with people who are comfortable with Web3, their wallet is becoming that single sign-on with that soulbound
Yeah.
token. It's
Exactly.
actually like the beginning of something that everybody say could not happen is actually happening. We just don't call it single sign-on, but it actually we call it soulbound token, or you call it soulbound addresses or souls, right?
Or even
But it's
like DI,
happening.
yeah, even yeah, yeah,
DID, yeah, yeah.
exactly, yeah, yeah, and it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of complexity around sort of wallet recovery, for example. Okay, so
Hmm.
you spend all of this time building this identity, and then you lose your private key. So there's unanswered questions there from
Hmm.
a recovery perspective. We're building recovery in I would say, centralized manner to start with,
Yeah.
which is like
Hmm.
our hack to get us into market and being pragmatic with what is decentralized, what isn't. But you can see a world where like recovery of your soul can go to first degree connections, like people that
Yes.
know you in your family, people that know you in your work network. They have been built up through this soul link. But in order for that to be secure, you need critical mass. So like
Yeah.
you've got to have this, I think, constant pragmatism of like looking at your lowest risk entry point, building what's required to get the desired outcome, and maximizing what you can do in a decentralized way, and
Yeah.
quickly iterating to replace, like, as things scale, increasingly become more decentralized over time, and ultimately that will build the future.
Yeah, and I think we have to be patient both in
Yeah,
terms of like, when there's a technology is ready, obviously we also have to be aware that some of the solutions to the problem may exist in one layer below. We've been very kind
yeah,
of spending a lot of time in the Node Safe or the smart contract wallet ecosystem. A lot of solutions are coming from the composability of wallet, right? Ethereum
yeah,
started out with externally owned account, which is just kind of your own key, your own account, lose your key, seed phrases, and it's gone. But there was this idea of a smart contract account, which can have multiple owners, that can have rules, or you can change the owners, in
exactly.
various implementation. So there are primitives that's being worked on by the smart contract wallet people. Nosa say being the leader on that, and we are safeguarding and
Yeah,
glad to be part of that community. But I think those like lower level horizontal primitives can be applied to some of these
yeah,
like recovery problems. So we work on a wallet, and our wallet uses Nosa say very deeply in it, so that we can experiment with what happens if that account is everything, but the seed phrase is just one owner of that account. Then suddenly
right.
you're in a better shape to say, oh, I have another I have another phone that has another EOA key, but they both share the account. I need two things, and you can start building something like multi-device recovery that Apple and
Yep,
Google does, and those kind of Lego bone composability is what excites me about this field, is because
yeah,
we don't have to build those infrastructure. We just have to be recognized as builders. Like you're in a DeFi builder, I'm more like a infra UX builder, toolkit builder. We have to be aware of who is about to solve the problem.
yeah. And I think that's what I've loved about being in Web3 for so long, and like building in it for a while through my career, is there is this real, the open source community and space leads to a much higher velocity of development,
Hmm.
and much more collaborative. Like these big problems would remain unsolved in big centralized organizations for a long time, or if they were solved, become critical pieces of centralized IP that don't benefit the
Mm,
community and the end users, right? So what we see now is like a general proliferation very quickly of technology that benefits the user, and then the adoption and collaboration between teams or projects or protocols to adopt, integrate, build on, iterate, and improve. And I think that vastly speeds up the problem solving in the space, even though sometimes it feels like things move slowly, even though it
yeah.
sometimes feels like we've been talking about the merge for so long. Um, things are still moving, and some really intelligent people, lots more intelligent people are moving to the space and building, you know, elegant solutions to complex problems. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about being in the space, especially at the moment in this time.
Yeah, and then sometimes we recognize the applicability of these technology, and we get excited. We talk about all the ways applied or can be applied, but it's not there
Mm-hmm.
yet, and that becomes a little bit of the disconnect
Yeah,
between the
it
reality
does.
and the vision. However, it is also somewhat disingenuous to come and say, "Well, Web3 is just a nice little toy that people." No, I actually really believe that this is a fundamental architectural building block, but we're going to need a lot of Web2 integration. So I gave a talk at the ETHCC in Paris last week, and the simplest of the two slides I have on screens was, Meh to Web2 stack with Web3 NFT integration. Not really
Right.
excited about that.
Yeah.
Like woohoo to Web3 stack with Wallet Connect and smart contracts and CK Snarks and off-chain private transaction and whatever it might be with Web2 integration. I think that inversion hasn't happened yet. I think people are
Yeah.
still saying, let's build a website and then add some coins. They're not saying, let's build a dApp and add some adapter to,
Yeah.
credit bureaus and stuff like that.
Exactly.
But that's going to
Yeah.
happen though.
It is, and that's like, while we've spoken a lot about our kind of base layer here and sort of the actual infrastructure, the one thing that we took a very early view on was bootstrapping our own protocol with that entry point and use case. We
Hmm.
have a mobile app that's live with a lender in it today, have a web application that you can go through and sign up and create your identity and link all these different data sources. And for us, it's been very important to build a product that has fit with the end user, and then a use case with a consumer, a lender in this case. It could be another use case we're exploring is a DAO or a DeFi project looking to do airdrops or soul drops to end users. Voting in DAOs says we can protect against we can create Sybil resistant voting with our soulbound identity. Like we're looking for DAOs to work with to implement our identity to underwrite voting, create like a risk layer or anti-fraud layer around voting in DAOs from wallets where collections of wallets that have associations could collude, and that can be identified through our infrastructure. There's a lot of really interesting things, but for us, like the core entry point now is with credit and giving people that first step into credit, which is building a credit identity, and then getting a loan after.
I think the second part of getting a loan after, like, I think the one thing the Web3 people has to continue remember that, the whole idea of money is not, it's in no way a dirty word. It's something that a lot of the Web2 company don't want you to talk about because they're not giving you any. They're taking it from you. They're not giving it to you, so they don't talk about it, right? But with Web3, we have to acknowledge that it's a powerful thing to be able to say, hey, do this thing on Web3 and get a loan, right? Like, and it's been driven a lot of the stuff. I do want to kind of ask yourself, like, I've seen other approaches, for example, like Gitcoin Passport, using the kind of like the grant history within the thing to create Sybil resistance. Do you believe that, in this aggregation theory, is that at the end of the day, all of these signals from these different interaction of people with their wallet would just get munched together the same way credit bureau munch everything together? Or do you believe that one of these things will become the Google login or Facebook login of this app?
Oh, that's a good question. I do think the account of a user eventually will become the single login. I also think there's the place for different methodologies. So like DID compared to like soulbound, they both function for different types of like verified credential implementation if you decide to use them in the way that we're using it, soulbound. I'm sure that we will get an ecosystem of single sign-ons that center around an entry point. So like I think about this with Facebook, as much as I don't like the entity. Facebook's leg up and way into single sign-on, their cold start to get it going was trolling your friends, poking people, and posting pictures of what you're doing on the weekend. And from there, that unlocked single sign-on for Facebook, because it was just like, you're so embedded in the ecosystem. So what is the entry point that is going to give the first mover that adoption? I don't think it's a standalone identity protocol. I think it is an application that has identity built into it in the same way that email unlocked Google single sign-on.
Right. I agree. Yeah. It's not clear what it is. We don't like, it's very easy to say that what would drive adoption for Web3 is social networking, like decentralized social. The chances of that being the thing is so small, because usually the thing that drives the next thing is usually not the thing that drove the last era. Like that's pretty much like a safe bet in terms of like, strategy and analysis and stuff like that in a business school sense. Pretty much never going to happen twice.
Exactly.
So I am not like completely bearish on Lens and DSO or whatever it's called. But that's so. But I do believe it will be something else. I think it's something related to people's economic destiny. I think tying that a little bit more honestly about the new tools we introduce with tokens and badges. It's about economic opportunity, as you started in the top of the show.
Yeah, and it goes full circle back to what you're saying, which is, give me this data, use this product because I'm going to get value. And Facebook is really interesting because the value was a human endorphin hit of some description by interacting in social media, connecting people in a more frictionless way. What is that moment here? Well, if we look, it's been degenning and making money on DeFi or DeFi farming. Like that has given people an entry point, but there hasn't been an identity built around that. There was just, DEXs and other interfaces to do that. So this next cycle, I'm going to say this because we're building it, but like for me, again, like the credit entry point, I strongly have strong conviction on being the interface through which those next, billion users will come over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant to people, and then and unlocking ability of using credit to do more in this world in the limited time you have is so much of the gift that when you're
Right.
in a credit rich environment and you have that legacy admission to FICO University, uh,
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah,
and
it is.
I benefited from that. So in some way, I certainly do not empathize as a first person, but I totally understand it as a second party intellectual, or at least try
Yeah.
wannabe.
Yeah.
This is super exciting. I think you're right. Like
Thank
we
you.
need to find applications and use case, and by way of the application and use case, kind of Trojan horse a new primitive and protocol for people
Yeah,
to recognize that there's a patterns and a
exactly.
platform here. A lot of what we do in Cardstack is imagine what would be the kind of Trojan horse for decentralized compute, decentralized UI and
Mhm.
API that's owned by community and like schema.org type of correlation, but
Yeah.
not by a few big search engines. And it's to me it's just fun software that you can use that connect to all these Lego blocks that allows you to build your own Minecraft, except the red bricks is actually a purple diamond with Ethereum, right? So to me,
Yeah.
this idea of bringing no code and this kind of like, a sandbox game, city skylines type of experience into web and say, hey, the distance between a user and a producer and a creator, it's smaller on our platform, requires a lot of hard problems underneath it. But what we need to do behind those Lego blocks is to have actual real protocol that is actually implement the primitive of the world, and then we can simulate it in a new third version of the world. And I think it's gonna move a lot faster than people think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, like talking about NFTs and sort of, I think there's be a couple of competing entry points. Credit is 100 is unquestionably be one of them.
Hmm.
But then, like, there's a reason why so many of the NFT platforms or NFT projects are getting such big funding, because if you think about the user base they're aggregating, it does give that natural sort of interface with the end user through which you can start building
Hmm.
more interesting, like that idea of single sign-on comes from like having a critical mass of users. Right now we have 43,000 users organically.
Yeah.
Seeing that grow to like 250,000 to a million starts to really build conviction around the fact that this is like a strong entry point, and you can start to build more use cases and funnel those people deeper into Web3, like whether it's credit, whether it's signing onto a platform, whether it's many kind of other use cases from KYC through to like identity
Hmm.
management. You name it, you think it. So yeah, it's a really exciting time, and I think that the next 4 years coming up to the cycle is going to be really nailing. Like 2013, we saw all the exchanges come to fruition. We had the likes
Yeah.
of MintPal and Cryptsy go under, and then the likes of Coinbase, Gemini, and others sort of grow out of that cycle into the last cycle, 2017.
Yeah.
They've matured into attracting institutional investors this cycle. Last cycle, we had the beginning of DeFi with MakerDAO, and then we're seeing the centralized institutions struggling this time because they haven't lent their balance sheet appropriately. They haven't even lent it to retail. They've lent it to a single entity that's failed, which is
Hmm.
going back to 2008, to be perfectly frank. So we'll now see what is the next evolution kind of show, and it's going to be a diversification of the way that funds are going to be utilized in centralized, you know, I call them neo like lenders or neo crypto fintechs, which is the Voyager, BlockFi's of the world, Celsius of the
Right.
world.
Hmm.
They're going to need to position their balance sheets somewhere to give
Hmm.
yield to their customers. The unlocking there is going to come from uncollateralized lending, I believe, in this next cycle.
Yeah, and whether it's uncollateralized or less collateralized or boosted
Exactly.
through other means, and
Masa.
I'm a exactly. I know that there are other people building other type of like signals that would certain type
Yep.
of cash flow that has certain type of history and type of thing. These are all ways of go beyond the whole pawn shop. Like, hey, here's a Rolex. How much do you give
Right.
me? Which is
Exactly.
essentially what MakerDAO is, and it largely
Yeah.
is. And it will be very exciting to see how the the esoteric concept of DeFi translates to a meaningful impact in people's life. And I think that's the disconnect, right? And I want to
Exactly.
get back to the beginning when we talked about your own personal experience, like being able to get a loan to buy a place when I was young was amazing, right? That moment was like, wow, like now I'm a homeowner. Now that's really, amazing feeling. And I think more people should have it because it is empowering and it's also incredibly fun. And so much of Web3 is about ownership, and hopefully we give people
Exactly.
ownership to more things in the real world than the token.
Exactly. Imagine demonstrating your past 7 years rental history alongside a
Mm,
thin FICO report,
yeah,
alongside crypto assets that you don't want to liquidate, but you
yeah,
could freeze as collateral somewhere, maybe, or show and demonstrate that you've managed them effectively for 7 years and there's not a high propensity to liquidate.
yeah,
So you've got this net worth and you've got history. Imagine being able
yeah.
to show that to someone to unlock like the first step on getting a home. At
Hmm.
39 years old today, unless I sell crypto assets, there's no way of me getting a mortgage
Mm,
because, in FICO terms, I don't have enough credit age, which means over the last 7 years of living in the US, I don't have enough age, despite having a 750 FICO score.
yeah.
I don't have
Because you're a
enough credit
7-year old to
age.
them. You're a 7-year-old boy.
I'm a 7 year old. Yeah, I'm like literally, I'm 7 years old.
Right, right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
funny. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And
So
I could
as
pick up the
much,
phone and like
yeah,
call my friends and say, or even you say, can you add me to one of your credit cards and I'll inherit your history from that credit
right.
card, and that would
Yeah,
boost me. But like, there's a limit to how many times you can boost yourself and still get away with
right.
it.
Yeah, so decentralized algorithm has been running our lives, and I think
Yeah,
we talk about biodiversity, but I think algorithmic diversity is our savior. So at least there will be in
yeah,
some ecosystem where your 7-year old is actually
exactly.
like it's better. So
Yeah,
and I'm not really against everything that's centralized. I'm just for iterating one more time on the mechanism of our thing, and this tool set we built together as this community of Web3 just gives us a new canvas to draw on it, and it's just so
exactly.
exciting as a builder.
Yeah, and that hybrid approach is necessary to cross the chasm right now. For us to
Completely, because
cross quickly, we've got to
yeah,
make it hybrid.
because the chasm is it's the gap that we need to cross. The
Yeah,
hybrid approach
yeah,
is the
exactly,
physical structure to cross over and let
exactly.
people use their mobile device
Yeah,
and actually participate in something that's meaningful to them.
yeah.
Wow, this is so cool, and I love what you're doing. I love the
Thank you
fact
so
that you're
much. Likewise.
coming from a place of not only knowledge but also understanding in a first person sense, and those are the best thing. There's a lot of tourists in this space, both in terms of the use case they pick, whichever is hard, and
Yeah,
the chain they pick, whichever one is
yeah.
conveniently giving away grants. But I think if we solve these things independent of the kind of hype cycle in crypto, but in the cycle of human progress, I think it's exciting.
I like that. It's very inspiring. Yeah, I agree with you. Very much agree with you. Very much agree with you. It's an exciting future, and it's one that is manifesting itself more quickly than we all think, but also attracting a lot of smart minds. Like the
Hmm.
wave of mindshare to Web3 it was already unstoppable, and I just see it accelerating all the time. So it's a very exciting time. Just
Yeah,
ignore price and build, and everything will rectify. We've seen this cycle both ourselves several
yeah.
times now.
And the talent level and the ability, the quality of the conversation, and the Stephen Johnson, the author, said that adjacent possible. Like the next thing you can do with the thing we have is kind of like everything. Like
Yeah, yeah,
it really is just at the edge of it. And I think we're all just trying to do our part. But we know that the when we kind of like present our potluck together, it's a lot more than the
yeah,
some of the parts together. So
yeah.
it's always delightful to look at people, talk to people who have done. Uh, who's doing their part of cooking, not just coming here for a
Yeah,
free meal,
exactly,
right?
exactly, exactly. Yeah, and it's funny. We're always at that beginning of infinity. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's a great book, and it very much feels like that's always the case in Web3. This has been really enjoyable conversation.
Absolutely. And as always, we thank your community for joining us. We do this every Wednesday at 9 a.m. In a premiere, and we distribute it widely. Talking to builders is my favorite thing. And Web3 is, regardless of the price, one of the most exciting movement that we have ever seen. And hopefully we are, continue going to have these great conversations about different aspects of it. I think we can probably do 1,000 episodes of this easily
Yeah.
as it develops. And I'm so glad to have you join us today. And until next time, take care.